Hello, welcome to part 3 of the Models for Heroes paint along with Rob. Fill in bits and bobs. That's appropriate for this one. I'm going to quickly show you filling in those gaps we talked about in the last one. Now I've done a cleanup. Certainly it's not the easiest, it's slightly weird plastic, but you can do a respectable job getting rid of the worst bits. I got a very useful message which was put up on the mess by, I think it was Anthony, saying well, I certainly tested it on a little bit of this. Was once you've cleaned it from yesterday with the knife or file and put this on, if you put this on and then basically just rub over it with your finger, it comes up pretty smooth overall. And although so there's always going to be areas I'll spot again after, but mostly I'm pleased with what I'm able to get rid of. And the primer will probably show bits and bobs, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, we're going to be filling in gaps in the horse's derriere and other parts today. Loads of different ways of filling gaps. There are different products, things like this, Mr. White Putty, which is a bit of a stinky, evaporating style putty, which could be used. I don't have any, but some people have had good success with plastic putties. I think Deluxe Material do some, but other companies produce similar, and you'll have some success with that. I've always used two-part epoxy putties. The classic one you'd find in a Games Workshop store is green stuff, and it comes in a ribbon, green and yellow, but like I've had this a long time now. You can buy it in bigger blocks if you're going to use it a lot, which I don't, which is why these have probably gone rock solid in there. Not brilliant for filling in gaps because for me you can't sand them or even blend them very well with the surrounding material. So good for sculpting. I showed this in the thing the other day. It will take lovely detail. So these are supposed to be beads on a Native American woman's dress, and it will take that detail very well, but you can't easily sand that back down. Now you've got to kind of get it right first time. Side note, this was sold in Games Workshop stores because that's what the miniatures used to be sculpted in. Why was it sculpted in why was it sculpted in green stuff? Because the original metal miniatures were cast using vulcanized rubber, and it's the green stuff that could hold the heat and pressure required from the moulding process. Incidentally, the person who started and discovered this was a guy called Tom Meyer in America, and he used this for sculpting for Ral Partha and some of the really early metal miniatures, fantasy miniatures, but he also sculpted a range of miniatures for before the TV show ever came out for Game of Thrones, which brings us nicely back into our Game of Thrones Dothraki dudes. Right, so there is also this stuff called Magisculpt. This is a great almost porcelain style, very fine grade. I love it for sculpting other things. It's a good filler as well, but and you can get it from El Greco Miniatures. Worth checking out their site for miniatures in general. So it's two-part. And what else have we got here? Dog. We don't need your company now, dog. A classic one though, which everyone should relatively easily be able to find in the UK is Milliput. Milliput Standard. There's lots of different versions. Standard is still the go-to. It's relatively well priced for what you get and what you can do with it. It comes in 2 parts. Even if you've had it a long time, you'll find that I think that's the hardener and that's the resin, but I could be wrong, but one will always get a film over it. Yucky, it discolours. You can still get it to work. I think you can put it in the microwave to soften this one slightly. I've never done that because I don't have a microwave, but this one remains much softer. Take 2 equal sized bits, even with the gunk in it, and then mix them together. For this kind of thing, you don't want to mix up too much because you're always going to have bits left over, as these 2 bits prove from the session we had on Thursday and one I did after. Now I'm not going to, if it says mix for 2 minutes, I always mix for 2 minutes and then double the time just to make sure they're mixed, because that's a good thing to do. Right, tools for doing this kind of stuff, there's all sorts. Some are more sculpting orientated. This is a kind of a dental tool called a wax carver number 5. It's really good because it's got different rounded soft edges, one end, and a sharp, bladey kind of edge there, which would take doing detail. This is a homemade one I bought at a model show that's kind of got a useful tip for sculpting and more of a needle end, and some tape that's coming off it, so I might need to sort that out. Again, really useful. These things you'll pick up in Hobbycraft, these kind of rubber tipped things, paint shapers I believe are often called. Colour shaper, there you go. I can read upside down. But you really only need a cocktail stick, but cocktail sticks can be improved into quite useful sculpting tools by sanding them down, carving them down, shaping them into various different shapes. This one I turned into more of a spatula. Once you've sanded it to that shape, you can dip it in super glue, let that dry, and then sand it again, and you end up with, and dip it again if you want to. You can end up with quite a durable thing, which is very useful for sculpting, very good for creases if you were to be sculpting. And I'm going to guess that this is now 40 years old, so yeah, cheap. You can do it with bigger skewery type things as well to make different rounded shapes, all useful for various jobs. Yeah, just easy to do. Oh, and even things like the humble needle can be used. So rather than you watch me do all this kind of mixing that stuff, here's some I mixed earlier. Ta-da! Right, a useful little trick which I used, because the idea is that we're going to fill in those gaps. With the classic one is that one on the side there, and so we're going to ideally just have a little sausage of putty we're going to put in there. It's the easiest way to apply it. You could take it and pull little bits off and fill it bit by bit, but we can make a little sausage of this. Now I'm going to take a little bit of this, and this is something that I did on Thursday. People hadn't seen it before, and I saw it from a fantastic sculptor. Got a little bit of, this is acrylic sheet. This is 10 centimeters by 7, I believe. It's clear. I did wonder why being clear is a good idea, but then if you put that on your worktop and start rolling like that, you can see we're slowly making a sausage, and I can see how big it's getting because it's clear, so that's why it's clear, obviously. But yeah, so you can keep going. And if anyone saw the bootlaces, this is how I made the bootlaces on the figure in SitRep. Doing this while looking at it through a camera is quite tricky, but it's if you keep cutting it, making it smaller, because you don't need a lot. But you can make, yeah, if it gets too long and too unmanageable, cut it in half and continue thinning it. There we go. So you can go make that quite a long, useful shape. So very simply, I'm going to put some in. In there, so I'm going to take about half of that. I'm going to do it with my cocktail stick for our purposes here. Just gently pushing it in to start off with to make it stick. Ooh. And you're filling a seam, so you can get rid of any excess that you don't want in. And a nice thing, or one of the most useful things about Milliput is it is water. You can thin it with water, you can smooth it with water, and that's what I tend to do for this kind of thing. Okay. And it's also useful to just use an old brush. You can start smoothing it out, and I'm now going to grab my nicer tool I've made, because it's just going to deal with kind of feathering it out across the edges. When it does dry, it will be I could be able to sand it. But the bottom line is we want a nicer, smoother surface to paint later on, so that the horse's neck looks like a continuous thing. It's continuous on that side. We're not going to try and put in the extra or the muscles. We're just filling in the gap, so we don't need to go crazy with the amount we've got in there. There are, I mean, the same way I said about using the finger when using the extra thin to get rid of some of those seams. In this case, I'm just going to use my finger to smooth that into the skin and flesh of the horse's neck. That's pretty much all you really need to do. You can make it, you can stand that down when it's dry. This stuff takes 3 to 4 hours to dry. I'd usually leave it till the next day. I'll be adding, you're not going to watch me do, it'll be boring to watch me fill some of these other smaller gaps. There are some little gaps you could fill, because this arm is separate at the shoulder. You might not need it on that side, but there's a little bit flaky gap on that side. Now some, like you can see, I've done some on those arms. You can also see that the way this one's assembled and engineered, his loinclothy thing is part of his body, and the two halves of the horse disappears underneath. On this particular one, those two halves, or his loin cloth thing, is in two halves, which is a bit of a trickier seam to fill than that one. Let me just see. Again, with all of these, they're not things you have to fill. If you're painting folds and things across the back there, they will be, they would look neater and smoother and more realistic if you take the time to fill them. Now, what I will say is the sausage form doesn't work quite so well here. You will probably have to force some bits in individually into that gap. As so. Add some water there just to begin the smoothing process. So I'm starting to fill that. Got a little bit more way to go, but you're getting the idea that it's a little bit trickier. Now, if by adding the water it ends up getting a bit sticky and your tools begin to stick, you can use talcum powder to on the tool, or put maybe a little bit on if you don't want to try and get more really put to stick, and your tools won't stick, because sometimes when it gets too wet your tools will just keep sticking and pulling away at the putty. Now, I'm not going to do the whole thing again because this is now 18 minutes long. Blimey, where does the time go? I'll go away and do all the other little bits and pieces, and next time will be priming, and there you go. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I've covered all the things we need to, and I'll catch you later. Bye bye.